Who doesn't love a good crime drama? From carefully choreographed assassination plots to scarcely believable murder methods, there's a reason why this type of story fascinates us again and again. But as the history of our world demonstrates, such plots are by no means limited to the world of fiction. As far-fetched as they may seem, a number of proposed and planned assassination plots in modern history surpass the absurdity of those that we read in stories and see on the screen. Whether arising from public discontent or the inner workings of secretive organisations, these plans are shaped by the circumstances and era that they are born into, as well as from the characteristics and personality of the assassination target in question. This leads to murder plots that are sometimes as bizarrely creative as they are dark and twisted. In today's video, we will look at 5 assassination plots in modern history that were either halted or failed to be carried out, underlining the barely believable methods that have been used when pursuing high-profile political murders. Number 1. Castro's exploding cigar. When the revolutionary Fidel Castro came to power in Cuba in the year 1959, it put a communist regime right on the United States' doorstep. The result would be decades of hostility between the two countries, which reached their peak in the early 1960s with the botched Bay of Pigs invasion and the almost disastrous Cuban Missile Crisis. Whilst the Bay of Pigs was a spectacular failure to overthrow Castro's government, the CIA began to brainstorm plots to assassinate the Cuban leader in an initiative called Operation Mongoose. In their planning, they apparently became fixated on one particular aspect of his lifestyle: his love of cigars. Because what better way to wipe out the Cuban leader than by taking him down using a symbol of Cuba itself? Whilst the specific details of this plot are hard to pin down, it is believed that the idea was developed sometime around 1961. Some sources claim that the intention was to load a cigar with explosives that would be triggered when Castro would light it, a deadlier version of the prank exploding cigars that were popular around the time. Others suggest that the intention was to lace the cigar with a toxin called botulinum, poisoning the revolutionary as soon as he put one in his mouth. A box of these lethal cigars was actually delivered to the Cuban capital of Havana, but for reasons unknown they were never delivered to Castro, thus sparing him from an infamous and somewhat ironic death. Although this bizarre plot did not give the CIA their desired result, the goal of assassinating Castro remained an important objective for the Kennedy administration and for subsequent presidents beyond him. Over the course of 40 years, it is estimated that there were over 600 attempts made on Castro's life as part of Operation Mongoose and other initiatives. Documents declassified in 2007 shockingly revealed that some of those in the American government had even engaged the support of mafia figures in their attempts to assassinate Castro. Funnily enough, Castro actually gave up smoking cigars in the 1980s. The repeated attempts on his life all failed, and he remained the leader of Cuba until 2011, before eventually passing away in 2016 at the age of 90. Of the insane number of plots to kill him, Castro once said, "If surviving assassination attempts were an Olympic event, I would win the gold medal." Number 2. The man Stalin couldn't kill. From one Cold War superpower to another, the Soviet Union were trying to influence a regime change of their own, but they were up against a leader that even the fearsome Joseph Stalin himself was unable to get the better of. This was the Yugoslavian president Josip Broz Tito. Following some brutal years of conflict in the Balkans during the Second World War, Tito emerged in 1945 as the leader of a new communist Yugoslavia and as a close ally of the Soviet leader Stalin. However, unlike the other nations of Eastern Europe, Yugoslavia largely managed to liberate itself from Nazi rule in World War II, rather than being freed by the Soviets. Because of this, the Soviet Union could not control Tito's Yugoslavia in the same way. Instead, Yugoslavia pursued its own political aims in southeastern Europe, frequently proving a nuisance for those in Moscow. By 1948, Stalin had had enough. As the two leaders shifted from allies to enemies, Stalin sought to replace Tito with someone more loyal to the Soviet regime. The world had already seen just how far Stalin's brutality could reach when his nemesis Leon Trotsky was assassinated in Mexico. But Tito was a different story. During the war, he had survived assassination attempts from enemy groups such as the Serbian Chetniks, Croatian Ustashas, and the Nazis themselves. Even Stalin would not find this easy. Several plans were hatched, the most notorious of which focused on an agent named Josip Grigorevich, otherwise known as Max. Under a false identity, Grigorevich secured the role of Costa Rica's ambassador to Yugoslavia, giving him a chance to get up close to Tito. The idea was for Max to go into a meeting with Tito and spray the Yugoslavian leader and his associates with bacteria of the plague, which the assassin would be protected against. Even more bizarre than that was an idea where Max would open a jewellery box containing a poison gas, which he himself would also be protected from. In the end, neither of these plots came to fruition, partly due to Stalin's own death in 1953. All in all, Tito survived over 20 assassination attempts by the Soviet leader, and once wrote him a letter with one of the most chilling quotes in history: "If you don't stop sending people to kill me, I'll send one to Moscow, and I won't need to send a second." Number 3. The Cato Street Conspirators. Assassination plots against political or religious leaders is a tale as old as time. But how often do you hear of someone trying to wipe out not just one leader, but a country's entire government? Well, in the city of London way back in 1820, such a plot very nearly became reality. This was the story of the Cato Street Conspirators. In the Britain of the early 19th century, hardships were rife. After over a decade of war against Napoleon's France, the returning soldiers and everyday citizens turned the page to what they hoped was a new start. But there was one big problem. Things at home were simply not getting any easier. The lack of political reforms, as well as the Corn Laws of 1815, caused riots, one of which led to the infamous Peterloo massacre near Manchester, where 18 protesters were killed and over 700 injured. For some, Peterloo was the final straw. Amidst the suffering, one group plotted the assassination of the Prime Minister Lord Liverpool and his entire cabinet as revenge. Known as the Spencean Philanthropists, they had reason to be optimistic. Just 8 years earlier in 1812, British Prime Minister Spencer Perceval had been assassinated, and some members of the group had already been involved in previous plots to overthrow the government, some of whom only narrowly escaped punishment. When the long-reigning King George III died in January 1820, the conspirators decided that this was the time to act. Led by two men named Arthur Thistlewood and William Davidson, the plan was simple. Lord Liverpool and his cabinet were believed to be attending a dinner on the evening of February 23rd at the home of Government Minister Lord Harrowby. The conspirators would storm the building, overpower the servants, and assassinate the entire group using pistols and grenades. Thistlewood managed to recruit a total of 27 conspirators, and the plan was set to begin. However, in its ranks, the group had a traitor. It turned out that a man named George Edwards, one of Thistlewood's most trusted acquaintances, had been working for the police all along. The entire story of the cabinet dinner was a setup by Edwards, who was encouraging the group to attack the government whilst keeping his police colleagues informed all the way through. On the afternoon of February 23rd, police descended on the group's Cato Street hideout right as the plot was about to commence. As they stormed the upstairs of the building, the room fell into darkness. Some of the group surrendered, others fought back, and Thistlewood even killed a police officer before attempting his escape. The plotters faced a range of sentences, 5 of whom, including Thistlewood and Davidson, were condemned to be hung, drawn and quartered. Their execution took place on May 1st, 1820, and such a radical plot has rarely been seen in Britain since. Number 4. Lumumba's poisoned toothpaste. Back to the Cold War now, and we come to focus on a leader who is geographically a long way away from both of the world's superpowers, but not far enough to evade their paranoia. This was the Congolese leader Patrice Lumumba. A firm and vocal opponent of European colonialism, Lumumba watched as the various colonial territories of Africa began to achieve their independence one by one beginning in the 1950s. In 1960, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, also known as the DRC, followed this trend, and the 35-year-old Lumumba became its first prime minister. Although elected fairly, his anti-colonial rhetoric and left-wing stance concerned both the United States and Belgium, the Congo's former colonial ruler. Their worry deepened when Lumumba began corresponding with the Soviet Union. Being such a giant country in Central Africa, the West feared that if Congo moved towards communism, then some of its neighbours may do the same, expanding the USSR's influence and power. In reality, a shift towards communism was never truly likely, but Lumumba's contact with the Soviets worried the US and Belgium enough to begin plotting to get rid of him. In August of 1960, US President Dwight Eisenhower is believed to have personally ordered Patrice Lumumba's assassination. The plot was led by a man named Larry Devlin, who was essentially the CIA's man on the ground in the Congo. Devlin was aided by a CIA chemist named Sidney Gottlieb, who produced a syringe of poison that was intended to be handed over to Devlin. The idea was that via Devlin's orders, this poison would be placed in Lumumba's food or even in his toothpaste. However, the plan had difficulties, and in the end it was never attempted. There were fears that the poison was becoming unstable, and it was supposedly thrown in the Congo River. Another difficulty was that another CIA operative in the plot refused to be directly involved in murdering Lumumba, as it later turned out that the poison toothpaste was just one of 9 assassination methods brainstormed by Devlin. In the end, the CIA did not assassinate Lumumba directly, via poison toothpaste or indeed any other means, but both the US and Belgium did assist Lumumba's associate, an army officer named Mobutu, in betraying the Prime Minister. Mobutu's troops flew Lumumba to a breakaway area of the country called Katanga, an area that was economically friendlier to Belgium and the West than Lumumba's government. It was here where Lumumba was assassinated in January 1961. Meanwhile, Mobutu soon seized power for himself and went on to become the brutal dictator Mobutu Sese Seko, ruling the Congo with an iron fist for over 3 decades. Number 5. The Other Sarajevo Plot. The city of Sarajevo, Bosnia is infamous as a site of Archduke Franz Ferdinand's assassination in 1914, which triggered the First World War. However, just months prior to this history-defining moment, the very same group of assassins had tried to kill a different member of the Austro-Hungarian government in the same city. The man in question was Oskar Potiorek, the Austrian governor of Bosnia. Like Franz Ferdinand, Potiorek was seen by Bosnia's Serbian population as a symbol of Austrian imperialism in the Balkans, responsible for the oppression of Bosnia's large number of ethnic Serbs. Potiorek had himself played a role in this oppression that antagonised the Serbian population. In 1913, he had declared a state of emergency, which had dissolved the local parliament and closed down Serbian cultural associations. In January 1914, the Black Hand Nationalist Society and the Young Bosnia movement, who would later be involved in the Franz Ferdinand plot, held a meeting in the French city of Toulouse to decide on targets for assassination. Instead of Franz Ferdinand, Potiorek was chosen as the target, and a man named Mohammed Mehmed Basic was dispatched to Sarajevo with a dagger and a bottle of poison. Having travelled across Europe, Mehmed Basic was nearing Sarajevo when the police searched his train. Fearing that he'd be discovered, he disposed of the poison in the train's lavatory and threw the dagger out of the window. All of a sudden, the plot to kill Potiorek was over in a very anticlimactic fashion. Mehmed Basic was recalled in March to join a new plot to kill the Archduke, and the rest is history. Potiorek would go on to organise the Archduke's visit to Sarajevo on June 28th that year, and was in the royal car that morning. He came face to face with Mehmed Basic, who was one of the assassins lining the street, but once again, Mehmed Basic lost his nerve and his target got away. When Mehmed Basic's associate Gavrilo Princip assassinated the Archduke and his wife later that morning, he later claimed that the second bullet was intended not for the Duchess but for Potiorek. Enraged and perhaps driven by survivor's guilt, Potiorek increased repression against the Bosnian Serbs as Europe fell into war. However, a poor start to Austria-Hungary's military campaign saw him lose his prominence in the army, and he quietly fell from power, eventually dying in 1933. Though the assassination plot against Potiorek was hastily put together and fell apart at the drop of a hat, it's interesting to wonder how historically significant it could have been had Mehmed Basic succeeded. If he had, perhaps the Black Hand would have been satisfied with their work and not attempted the Franz Ferdinand killing later that year, perhaps delaying or significantly changing the outbreak of the First World War and subsequent 20th century history. It was just one failed plot, like countless others both in this video and throughout the long history of the world, but with a different outcome. Who knows how earth-shatteringly significant it may have been. As always, we hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching. Subscribe for more from the Assassinations Archive.